Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 10th Enel Focus On. We are here in Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you to everybody who's joining us live on the streaming. It's great to have you with us, and we hope that you're going to stay with us over the duration of this very interesting event. Today we have influencers from 9 countries, coming from Europe, from North America and Latin America. And as is tradition, I'd like to start with a brief introduction from everybody going around the room. So we'll start with you, please, sir.
Good morning. My name is Ari Pesco. I'm the director of the Electricity Law Initiative at Harvard Law School. So I'm interested in how regulation of the power sector here in the U.S. Interacts with efforts to decarbonize.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julia. I'm from Spain. I live in Madrid. And I'm working in CBRE, Real Estate Consultancy. And I'm in charge of CBRE Lab, where we measure the impact of architecture on people's well-being and productivity.
Good morning. My name is Alex Moore. I'm an assistant research professor and postdoctoral fellow at Harvard and the Climate Change Institute, and I work on the impact of climate change on human health and the environment.
Good morning. My name is Jim Boyle. I'm CEO and founder of Sustainability Roundtable, Inc. We're a confidential membership-based strategic advisory service that has helped more than 75 Fortune 500 companies over these last 10 years.
Hi everybody, my name is Andrea Bertaglio. I'm an Italian journalist writing for La Stampa. I cover environmental topics and of course green economy, and I'm pretty much curious to hear and to see how the green economy is developing in the US, particularly in this very moment.
Hi everyone, here is Simone Cosimi. I'm a tech and innovation reporter from Rome, here for Wired Italy.
Good morning, my name is Brenda LeMay. I'm with Enel Green Power North America. I am Director of Commercial Office and work with our corporate clients.
Good morning, my name is Mark McGrail. I work at Enel Green Power North America, and I head up the Energy Management Group.
Hi, good morning. I am Isabella Penizza, and I am in charge of the Communication Digital Hub, who is organizing these amazing events like the Enel Focus On with Ryan.
Hi, my name is Justin Backley. I'm the Executive Director of the Shared Value Initiative, of which we've worked with Enel for a number of years. The idea of creating shared value emanated here at Harvard with Harvard Business School professor Michael Porter. And the basic concept is, how do companies see social and environmental issues as opportunities for growth and innovation, not as constraints? Thanks.
Good morning for everyone. I'm Natália Abreu from Brazil. I'm a co-founder at Auto Sustentável and one of the principal platforms of sustainability in Brazil. We talk about sustainability apply at the daily life of the people.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Juan. I'm from Colombia. I'm the co-director of Low Carbon City, a global movement that's tackling climate change, empowering citizens. And I'm looking forward to hearing and learning what you're doing and how we can work together to tackle this great challenge.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Virginia Vilariño from Argentina. I am manager of the Climate and Energy area of the Argentinian Business Council for Sustainable Development, which is a local chapter of WBCSD. I also lead the PPA's Renewable Forum in Argentina, promoting PPAs among private sector. And I'm a lead author of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So very grateful for the invitation.
I'm Jose, CEO and founder of Algramo, a social entrepreneurship that wants to reduce the price for goods for poor families, also reduce the plastic that we are producing every day, and also help the mom and pop stores to compete with the big supermarkets. So we are working with more than 1,700 stores in Santiago and thinking how we can scale to impact Latin America, reducing the price, the plastic, and help the store to compete with the supermarkets.
Awesome. Good morning. My name is Tina Adolfsson, and I'm an advisor and a consultant here in the Boston area. I came from corporate and now working with companies scaling up, a lot with social enterprise and most with data tech. Looking forward to today.
Hello, my name is Giorgio Buknic. I'm a TV journalist, a blogger, and a YouTuber with a following focused on technology and sustainable housing from Romania.
Great, thank you very much, everybody. So I should introduce myself as well. My name is Ryan O'Keefe. I'm the Director of Communications of the Enel Group. And I'd like to just have a special mention as well for all of my colleagues of the Global Communications team of Enel who are here with us today. We've spent the last 2 days together in Boston, all together from all around the world, working on how we build the brand of the Enel Group, and with a particular focus on two brands which have a very strong presence here in Boston, Enel Green Power and NLX. As I said, this is the first time that we're in Boston, Massachusetts for an Enel Focus On meeting. And Enel Green Power North America's headquarters is in Andover, just outside Boston. Enel Green Power is the largest renewable energy company in the world. We have 40 gigawatts, over 40 gigawatts of installed capacity across solar, geothermal, wind, and hydro technologies. This is a business which has enough installed capacity to power the state of Massachusetts by itself over 4 times. And the state of Massachusetts is one of the most densely populated states in the US. So we're talking about a very big business here. For the second year in a row, Enel Green Power broke its own record in terms of bringing new capacity online. Last year in 2017, Enel Green Power brought online 2.6 gigawatts of new capacity around the world. That was a record and remains a record, and we'll see if we can maintain our run this year as well. In the United States specifically, we brought online 1.2 gigawatts of new capacity, which makes us the leader also in the US market. We're in 24 US states. Now, in 2015, November, the Enel Group announced to its investors a new vision and mission, what we call open power. The open power mission is to open energy to more people, open energy to new technologies, open up new ways of managing energy for people, open up to new uses for energy, and open up to more partnerships. So this is effectively a roadmap for the Enel Group to driving and sustaining long-term shareholder value. There is a vision that overarches this mission, and that is open power to help solve some of the world's biggest challenges. Now, if I were to ask you, what is the single biggest challenge that we as a global community are facing, what would you say? Anybody? Climate change. Thank you, Amy. It's not a trick question. So, climate change, the biggest challenge that we as a society globally are facing today. And American corporations, I'm delighted to say, standing here in the United States, American corporations are taking this very seriously. To name but a few, Google, Anheuser-Busch, T-Mobile, Facebook, Adobe, Kohler, General Motors, Bloomberg. These are all big, global, leading businesses that have taken this challenge on and are seeking ways to ensure that they play their part in tackling climate change. And I'm delighted to say that Enel Green Power is the enabler in each one of those cases. These are not the only businesses, of course, who are taking this challenge seriously, but in all of these cases, it is Enel Green Power that is enabling these businesses to work towards overcoming this challenge. In the case of Anheuser-Busch, and we'll come to Angie in a second, but in the case of Anheuser-Busch, I just want to give you a sense about what it is that we're doing. So we are delivering renewable energy directly to one of their production facilities, and it is enough renewable energy to brew 20 billion bottles of beer a year. I don't even know what 20 billion bottles of beer looks like, but it feels like a lot. And that's how much clean energy Enel Green Power is delivering to Anheuser-Busch. So clearly, Enel Green Power is a very important enabler. This is a really big word for us, the word enabler. And I just want to talk a little bit about what Enel Green Power enables more broadly. In July last year, 2017, we were in New York for the Formula E race, of which Enel is the official power partner. And we used green certificates from one of our wind farms in the US to offset all the carbon emissions related to all of the logistics of the entire race, making it the very first ever carbon neutral motorsport event in the history of motorsport. And we went to the New York Stock Exchange to ring the opening bell to celebrate the event. It was fantastic. Today, Enel Green Power is an enabler for all of us in the room because, not content with just carbon neutrality, we've actually gone one step further. And we have more than offset all of the carbon emissions of everybody's trips to be here today, which means that today is in fact a carbon negative event and the first ever carbon negative Enel Focus On. So thanks very much to our colleagues from Enel Green Power for making this the first ever carbon negative Enel Focus On event. So we're here to talk about today how corporate America is going green. What is it that these companies are doing in order to deliver a green economy in the United States and worldwide? And we have three representatives of some world-changing organizations with us today. I'm really delighted to have Peter Fried, who is the Energy Strategy Manager from Facebook. Peter, thank you very much for joining us. Angie Slaughter, who is the VP of Sustainability for Anheuser-Busch. And, of course, we have Amy Davidson, who works at RE100. And Amy is going to start the Enel Focus On today with a fire starter discussion to prompt and provoke the usual debate that we have at our Enel Focus On meetings. Just to give you a little bit of background on Amy, so she leads collaborative programs aimed at accelerating the transition to a clean energy future. She oversees the Climate Group's flagship annual event every year, which is Climate Week in New York in September, which is held every year during the UN General Assembly. And when she was at JP Morgan Chase, she established the first Office of Environmental Affairs for the bank. So I think Amy is highly qualified to provide some overarching context for the discussion that we're going to have. So Amy, thank you very much for being with us today, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So great. I just want to start with a little bit of context about the Climate Group, just because it does matter so you can sort of know where we're coming from. So the Climate Group, we're an independent, international, not-for-profit, and we were founded in 2004. So I'm the executive director for the North America arm. And we have offices in the high-emitting economies, so that's where our focus is, the high-energy-emitting economies. So we're in New York, London, Brussels, New Delhi, and also in Beijing. And our mission is to accelerate climate action, because we're all trying to solve for climate change. And we do that by bringing together powerful networks of businesses as well as subnational governments. So mostly local governments at the state level as well as even at the city level. And then they can then shift global markets as well as change policy. And when we were founded, these are just a couple of our brands that you can see on there. And Ryan mentioned Climate Week, so thank you, because that's coming up, and we're working hard on that. And you'll see some of the other ones so that people are familiar with. But two things that are important to know is when we were founded in 2004, so now 14 years ago, we had two key sort of principles that we were thinking about. One is that we need to change the conversation around climate change away from the whole idea of it's a cost and it's a burden, and to the fact that it's an opportunity for innovation. So obviously Michael Porter and team is thinking about that too. And that's really what is very exciting, that we have an opportunity to create a better world with better solutions that are going to make a cleaner, healthier world and more prosperous world for all. And the second piece of the puzzle, for us at least, was how are we going to get the fastest direct greenhouse gas emission reductions? And that was by working with business, not working against business. Business is part of the solution. We're not going to solve this problem without business, so delighted to be working with Enel and Facebook and Anheuser-Busch and everybody that has come in. So critical element for how we look at the work. I'll be a little remiss, and I have to do this, is just remind people where we are and why there is so much urgency. So global warming is happening now. I'm not going to go deep into the science at all, but people should know that it is here today. I think everybody in this room understands that. It's not a future event. And one of the recent scientific studies that have come out from Antarctica is that the rate of ice melt is 3 times faster than it was in 2007. So we are we have our work cut out for us. Let's just all put it that way and just remind everybody that all of us play a role. All of us have to be part of this solution. So this is what we're trying to avoid. And it sort of looks like, oh, why bother to put up New York City underwater? But the reality is we're actually pretty close on path for this future. And that's not what we want, right? Nobody does. And we will work as hard as possible to make sure it doesn't happen. But sea level rise isn't the only impact of climate change, as folks know. We also have extreme weather events. Just less than a year ago, and this is for those in the U.S. audience mostly, there was a trifecta of hurricanes. So we had Hurricane Harvey, Irma, and then Maria, with devastating impacts, all within 30 days. And somehow we sort of forget this. And then behind all of that, there were also major wildfires burning in the U.S. And this has significant financial costs. There was over $200 billion of damage being done from those 3 hurricanes alone. And I think folks who follow what goes on in Puerto Rico is still trying to recover with its limited energy supply system. So we have a good need to address this, definitely. But also food systems are at risk, fresh water supply, and I know everybody's following this in their own way, but we shouldn't forget that. And particularly there's impacts to human health. And I guess what somebody here was from there's a great center here. Are you with the Center for Global Health and the Environment at Harvard? But another great center here at Harvard working on global health issues, because a warming planet will make our health systems much more difficult. So what do we need to do and in what time frame? And we're at 2018, and we really need to peak global emissions by 2020 and get to net zero emissions by 2050. So it's a steep curve for all of us. And one key component, not to solve the entire emissions problem, but is to look at the energy sector. So we need to transform the entire global energy sector to be 100% clean and non-emitting by 2050. So that's the scale of what we're dealing with, and that doesn't even get us to where we need to be in terms of complete emission reductions to solve global warming. And I always like to just kind of acknowledge that we should recognize that fossil fuels brought us the prosperity we all enjoy today. But we know better now that there are cleaner solutions such as wind and solar. And so let's make sure we employ them and move it forward and leave fossil fuel behind. So that's what needs to be done. And luckily, we have a framework for it. So there was, in December of 2015, as many of you were probably cheering from afar, right, a major unprecedented agreement for the Paris Climate Agreement. So this agreement, though, doesn't get us to where we need to be, but it has the structure for us to increase ambition. So countries still need to come together to increase their ambition to make sure that we can keep global warming well below 2 degrees. So it doesn't solve all our problems, but it gives us the structure and the collaboration from all the countries around the world, save one now. So the U.S., unfortunately, in June of 2017, Trump announced that he was going to pull us out of the Paris Climate Agreement. And he's really going it alone and also going exactly the wrong direction, away from innovation and away from the rest of the world. So what's really important is, though, that business has stepped up. Business has been stepping up since the beginning, but they stepped up even more to say that we are still in. So there's a big initiative in the U.S. to make sure that companies are actively engaged in supporting the Paris Climate Agreement, because they play a key role, because they show to governments and heads of state that there is an economic case and a business case for taking action. And businesses can't do it alone. So here's a good example, is the fact of our supply chains are so interconnected. And I'm sure some of the companies today might actually touch upon this. But we live in an interconnected world. And climate change impacts are happening everywhere around the world. And they can be very, very disruptive. So what is it that we can do? So I'm going to tell just 2 elements of what U.S. companies, but also global companies, are doing right now. One is this campaign or program which Ryan mentioned, which is called RE100. And what that is, we launched it in 2014 during Climate Week, so just 4 years ago. And it was to set a new level of ambition. So companies commit to 100% renewable electricity across their global operations. And we now have a growing list of 137 members, and 45 of those are US-based. But it's actually funny, a lot of US companies don't even think of themselves as US companies anymore because it is such a global, interconnected world. And the companies set their target no later than by 2050. And then they have a chance to report annually. So here we can see all of the logos of the companies to date. And it ranges across sectors. So you have consumer goods companies, you have telecommunications, and you have cement, and you have automotive companies. So there's a very, very good cross-section of companies. And then for an example of where all of these companies have operations, they're actually in 122 countries around the world. So this provides the opportunity to open up renewable markets across the world. And that's really the idea, is how these companies come together and they're able to shift the markets, not only in maybe their headquarter country, such as the US or Europe, where clearly we are most advanced, but also into Southeast Asia and other parts of the world, such as West Africa. And if RE100 were a country, it would be the 24th biggest country in the world, so larger than Poland. So this is pretty significant. And this data, though, is based upon our report back in January, so it doesn't actually capture the entire 137 companies that we have now. This is back in January. But you can see that we're going to be growing. And Poland is also, this is equivalent also to about the entire annual electricity use of New York State. So similar to Enel comparing themselves to Massachusetts, or 4 times Massachusetts. So it's a big impact, and we can see that as we double this or even triple the growth of RE100 companies, it's going to make a significant shift in the market. But what else can we do? So just this is one last note of where companies are going and what else do we need to do. Is in the US, transportation emissions have now overtaken electricity emissions. So our transportation emissions are actually going up, and we've been greening the electricity grid, which is terrific, but we have to tackle transportation emissions because we're not getting at energy if we're just looking at electricity. So what we've been doing is now working with companies in a new sister initiative to RE100 called EV100, and EV stands for electric vehicles. And this is where companies will commit by 2030 to electrify their vehicle use, so their fleets, whether owned or leased, as well as to install charging infrastructure. And we're hoping that this will be able to move the market and shift the market to a greener and more sustainable transportation supply. And right now we have 20 companies, only 2 in the US, but we are actively going after them. And so we can imagine a day when this slide looks very much like the RE100 slide, and soon we won't even be able to fit the logos all on because so many companies have come in and have been engaged. But we're really looking at soon we will have 100% clean electricity, and our cars and all of our transportation will be powered 100% by clean electricity too, as we move to electric vehicles and other zero emission vehicles. So that's the vision of where we need to get to. And again, I'm delighted to be here to sort of start off the conversation. I know Facebook and Anheuser-Busch will have much to contribute to the reasons of why they're doing this and how they're doing it. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Angie. So I'd like to bring in our 2 guests from Facebook and from Anheuser-Busch to give us a bit of insight as to how the rubber hits the road on this thing. How do we make this thing land and bring it to life? And you've both got, I guess, your own individual corporate stories about how it is that you became one of the leaders of this movement. Peter, can I start with you and just ask you to give us a couple of minutes overview about how it is that Facebook got to where we are today in terms of this movement.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for having us here today. It's a real pleasure to be here. Renewable energy has been something that's been very important to Facebook for quite a long time. In 2011, we were one of the first companies to set a 100% renewable energy goal for our facilities. So that was probably a little before RE100 was around. Obviously, a lot of companies have come along and done that, but it's been deeply ingrained in sort of the DNA of how we operate for a very long time. Our biggest footprint is our data centers. So we've got 14 data centers either under construction or operating around the world. Many of those announcements have been within the last 12 months, so our pace of growth has just continues to go up as more and more people come onto the platform and are using it. I think part of the reason we're here today is we have a newly announced data center or under construction data center in Papillion, Nebraska. We work closely with Enel to do a wind project to supply renewable energy to that facility, and that comes through our utility partner there, the Omaha Public Power District. We've got data centers both in the US and principally in Western Europe. And we use a wide variety of tools to supply renewable energy to those facilities depending on the different market types, working with utilities, working through market participants, working directly with developers, and really trying to expand the toolbox not only for ourselves, but also to make sure that other companies can take advantage of some of the things that we're putting together, particularly when we do new green tariffs or sort of electric rates with utilities, which are designed to allow companies to source renewables through their electric rates. We always try to make sure that other companies can come along with us in that journey and make sure that those rates are available to other companies. So that has been most of our focus. We've been at it for a long time, and as our data center footprint and fleet continues to grow, we will continue to work on sourcing renewables for all of those facilities.
Fantastic, thank you. Angie, tell us about these 20 billion bottles of beer.
20 billion. Well, so first of all, thank you very much for having Anheuser-Busch here today. And on behalf of 200,000 colleagues worldwide and 18,000 colleagues in the US, I'm pleased to be here. For those of you that don't know Anheuser-Busch, InBev, we produce in 50 different countries worldwide. We sell in 100 and brew, package, and ship over 500 beer brands, wonderful high-quality beer brands globally. Sustainability, I would say, is extremely integrated into our business. Beer is quite simply a very natural product, right? We need high-quality raw materials. We need a very sustainable water supply to be able to produce our high-quality beers. So it just makes perfect sense. And it's been integrated in for a long time. We have a long track history of commitments, but we just launched this year, as you may know, 4 different new pillar goals, sustainability goals for the entire company around renewables and carbon reduction, water stewardship, circular packaging, and also smart agriculture. So the renewable piece plays a big role for us. Clearly, we kicked that off last year by signing the agreement with Enel last September and announcing, and then the actual project came online just the first of this year, which allows us to be able to make that statement, right, that we have entirely offset our needs for our breweries here in the United States, so that 20 billion bottles of beer.
It's such a great number. So we all work for big global multinational organizations, and I guess we all know that inside big global multinational organizations, for better or for worse, there are a lot of hurdles that need to be overcome when you want to take something forward. What was your experience at AB in terms of, I mean, was this thing readily accepted by everybody? Were there naysayers? Did you have to overcome a lot of doubt?
Yeah, I'd say in general, we had a lot of support, and it came top down, which is what you need in the business community to really drive change. You have to have, at the CEO level down, clear direction, alignment, and movement forward to move the business forward, right? So that's key. I would also say that you need an authentic business connection, right? So the fact that renewables just makes sense for us, right? We're going to clearly need to use a lot of electricity in the future, right, to continue to produce beers, so why not renewable? Especially because we have seen that the price of renewables is such that it just makes good business sense. So from that standpoint, it's pretty easy to make a convincing argument that you can use.
So actually, in the end, it was a relatively straightforward process. There wasn't a huge amount of...
It was. I think getting everyone aligned, though, external stakeholders aligned, communication aligned as to what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah.
But we have a huge support internally in our business.
Fantastic. Peter, what would be your, if you were to give advice to your counterpart in another business that hasn't yet done this, what are the kind of the key tricks of making this thing happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, before I was at Facebook, I was consulting, working with companies to do exactly this. I've got some experience in that topic. I think ultimately, and Angie alluded to this, figuring out the connection back to your business objectives, and ideally sustainability is one of your core business objectives, is really key to getting these transactions done. And I think there are a wide variety of motivations for companies, whether it's the CEO saying this is something that I desperately want to do, or for many of us with consumer-facing brands, the customer saying this is something that I want you to do, and then figuring out how to bring whatever it is that you want to do in the sustainability space, whether it's renewable energy or waste or water, whatever it happens to be, and making that connection back for your internal stakeholders so that you can get whatever it is you're trying to do over the finish line, and then communicating that effectively externally to all of your key stakeholders, your customers, whatever it happens to be.
Great. So we're kind of at the beginning of this journey, right? I don't know what percentage of your complete energy consumption is now renewable. How much is it?
So we have a 50% renewable energy goal in 2018. We're getting very close to meeting that goal, and we'll have some announcements about it later in the summer. So that's about where we're at.
And where are these other facilities that are going to need to be connected to renewable energy? Because my question is this, and I guess, Angie, it'll be relevant for you as well. It's one thing if you happen to have a big utility-scale wind plant kind of next door to your billion-bottle manufacturing facility. But if you're manufacturing somewhere where you don't happen to have the facilities available, how are you going to reduce that? Because the first 50% maybe is kind of easily doable. The second 25% maybe is becoming more difficult. It's going to be that last mile, which I guess to really hit the target of 0, that's going to be the most challenging, right?
Yeah. I mean, not that the first 50% was easy.
No, sorry.
A lot of work went into that, and we'll continue to do that. So for us, one of the things that's been a real priority for us, there's two things that we think about when we're looking at new projects. So first of all, we want to make sure that they're additional. That's a little bit of a term of art in the industry, but basically our contribution to the project has to be meaningful in terms of it getting done. So, but for our participation, this thing wouldn't have happened. And then the second thing is we look to make sure, as best we can, that the projects are located in the same electrical grid where our facilities are. So it's really important to us that the place where we are taking power out of the grid, we are adding new renewable energy there. Now, of course, this question is bound to come up at some point. The wind doesn't blow all the time. The sun doesn't shine all of the time. So, of course, we are relying on the electric grid to make sure that the lights stay on inside of the data center at all times. They're critical facilities. But we make sure that the quantity of renewable energy put onto the grid in any given year matches up with the quantity that we're taking out. So in that...
We'll do the next Enel Focus on NLX, which resolves that problem.
And certainly a lot of people are starting to look in that direction. And I think, figuring out how we get to higher and higher penetrations of renewables on the grid is something that a lot of us are thinking about and concerned about.
Okay.
So, and I can add to that. So we started by first looking on-site, right? So we have about 7.5 megawatts today of on-site solar and wind at our breweries and facilities. And when we first launched the goal for 100% in March of 2017, it was a bit frightening, right? Because going to 100% from less than 2%, which was where we were at that point in time in terms of renewable electricity, was a bit astonishing in terms of how are we going to do this? Do we even have enough space, physical space at our breweries on site to get to 100%? And the answer is no. And clearly you also then don't have the economies of scale, and at every location we have, the wind doesn't blow, the sun doesn't shine, right? So the technology isn't being used as efficiently as it could be used. So our solution with Enel made perfect sense, right? Do something scalable, large, off-site, and take out a large chunk of what we need. We are now at 50% of all of our domestic needs, so we have another 50% to go. Likewise, a lot of work to do. But we also are continuing to look at the smaller scale on-site projects that will deliver a payback, make sense, and be viable for us. So that will still make up about 10% of our needs overall. But the additionality piece is also key for us. We didn't want to simply go out and monetize or buy green credits, right? We wanted to do something additional to bring new technology to the grid and advance. So.
Can I ask you about your supply chain? Because Jose was talking about how he lobbies for reducing plastic. There's a lot more to the question of climate change than simply electricity production and consumption. We've got a planet that we need to protect in a holistic sense. Water is clearly a really important part of your supply chain.
Extremely important.
Plastic, I guess, to a large extent. Sustainable agriculture, you've mentioned it already. Is this part of a holistic? This is part of a holistic drive,
it is.
I guess, on the part of Anheuser-Busch. Is the same, Peter? Is the same applicable in the world of Facebook? I guess it's more of a tech thing we're talking about.
Yeah, from our perspective, I mean, first of all, I'm an energy guy, so that is what I know. That said, we do have a robust sustainability program. We focus on a lot of different aspects of both the data center footprint as well as other things. Most of our footprint, though, is in electricity consumption for the data centers. I think 90+% is in the electricity. So for us, it really is first and foremost an electricity issue and a renewable electricity issue.
Final question for me, then we'll open it up to the floor. We've got market capitalization here of $500 billion between the two of you. There's a lot of investors who are sitting behind these two businesses. In what way do you present this story to your investors, to the capital markets?
So,
go ahead.
Go on, Angie, you go.
I'll throw out a couple of stats here, just from some recent readings. 84% of people want to invest in sustainable brands or want to buy sustainable brands, right? 76% of millennials look for sustainability aspects in companies when they're trying to figure out where they want to work. And 85% of high net worth millennials look for sustainable companies to invest in. So if you want a competitive advantage, you want to attract top talent, and you want new investors, it's a pretty easy sell when you talk about how you can bring this and really move your business forward. It's that intangible piece that is forward thinking, right? Which is what we are as a company. So.
Yeah. Peter, anything to add?
No, I thought that was a great summary.
It's so interesting, because of course, as a communications team at Enel, we have to grapple with this thing, and we can't use sustainability as a kind of a plaster to stick on top of something to make it look and sound good. It needs to be real. And for us, the big challenge is, how do we explain to our investors that when we say we're not going to build any more coal-fired power stations, it's not actually because of the pollution aspect of it. It's because the sustainability for shareholders is so important, and we're doing this in their interest because we know that building new coal-fired power is just not sustainable for anybody, for the environment, for shareholders, for everybody. And it's about telling that story in a kind of holistic sense. Let's open up to our group for any questions for Amy, for Angie, or for Peter. Who wants to have a start? Jose. Is it Jose? Did I say your name? Yeah, Jose.
I have a question for Amy, in specifically thinking in two things that I think that we are missing on the picture. One side is not related with energy, it's related with the emissions of eating meat, how it's related with all the graphics and how it's impacting the habits of consumption that we are having in the world. And the other thing that I think that we are not seeing today, but it's going to be in the picture, is about the electricity consumed by the bitcoins on all the stuff. Yesterday I was checking that it's consuming the same electricity as Portugal. So in the next year, it's going to be huge, the amount of energy that we are going to need. And I don't know if that is considered in the projections for the future, because I don't know how we can project how much electricity we're going to need for that. But for sure it has to be in the picture because we want to reduce all the emissions.
It's true. We actually have not gone after the Bitcoin miners. That's definitely been an issue. I do know that the province of Quebec recently had an issue with a miner there, a Bitcoin miner, and that they had to intervene. So because it was taking so much electricity. use. So that is something absolutely, it's great to raise that point, and I don't know, maybe Facebook has a response
Less
to it
a
too.
Facebook response, but this is something that I think anybody sort of in tech follows. And outside of Bitcoin, I know many of the new tokens are looking at lower compute intensive verification strategies. So hopefully we'll see changes coming along with other tokens that won't be quite as compute intensive.
Thanks for the panel. I have a question like, how can companies help citizens shift behaviors? Because at the end, it's citizens who are using transport systems or using energy. So how can companies engage with citizens or with their customers to try to shift the behaviors towards a more friendly climate lifestyles?
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about this at dinner, so maybe Angie wants to.
I can point back to a couple things we're doing. Well, first of all, the renewable energy pledge that we have, it's really been brought to life through our Budweiser brand. So we also developed a symbol to put on packs. So every bottle, every can will have this symbol that speaks to our pledge and that we are 100%. And so when you think about that, going back to the 20 billion bottles of beer, our Budweiser brand in North America, we sell 15 million bottles every day, cans every day. So when you think about that, it's 15 million potential conversations that our consumers can have over a beer. Ambassadors, right? So it's bringing that to the forefront, engaging our consumers, finding out what matters to them, and then bringing them into the conversation. I'll also point to, because we talked a little bit about packaging, the need to really, and it being a driving force too, and from an emissions standpoint, we really need to influence our consumer behavior on the back end with packaging as well, right? So when you think about the recycling gap, in the U.S., 75% of our trash is recyclable, but yet we only recycle 30%. So we throw away $11 billion worth of packaging materials and reusable containers every year. So how do we influence that? How do we bring that conversation forward? How do we work with governments, our stakeholders, our wholesaler system, our retailers to drive change? And one thing we also recently did is we signed an agreement with the Closed Loop Fund. If you're familiar with them, they provide low interest loans to create infrastructure. So we're doing that now with them, and that's just one solution in the packaging space.
I think from our perspective, we have heard loud and clear from the users of Facebook, the people that are on it, as well as from our stakeholders, that this is an issue that's important to them. And so we've really internalized that and made sure that it's part of the business. Beyond that, we've worked really hard to make sure that when we put solutions in place, they're available to others. And I think a lot of what we're working on, both through RE100 and also through some of the other associations like REBA, which is the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, we've tried to bring other companies into the fold and expand the toolkit to make sure that they can also do some of these things. And so as a result, I think what we're all hoping to see is that more and more businesses, particularly consumer-facing businesses, will start doing these types of renewable energy initiatives, and that you'll have outreach in that direction as well. So a little bit more top-down, enabling the companies to do it, and then the companies do it, and you start some of those conversations that Angie was talking about.
Hi, I guess a question actually for all four of you. And you mentioned in your opening, because I think there's slightly different perspectives, it's obviously an issue that we're talking about here that can be heavily shaped and influenced by the regulatory policy. And, obviously you would play a big role in trying to influence, shape that. You mentioned the Trump administration changes there. But it also strikes me that we have four different perspectives, and I'm curious, especially for Facebook and AB InBev, within your business, as this is one component, how much do you try to shape and influence policy on energy? Because obviously it's critical and a business driver, but also part of a much broader portfolio of what you do. But I'm also curious because, of course, not in this room are massive forces, let's just say in the United States, that would resist all of this, right? And whole businesses, as you said in your opening, who would have a totally different view of where we should be going or how to protect the businesses that they know and love for over a long time frame. So I'm just curious from all of your perspectives, what does that regulatory shaping and influence look like? Is it a national thing? Is it national, state, local? Is it all of the above? And just comments on how you view that. And Ryan, I'd love to hear the Enel view on that as well.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to start. I mean, the climate group we sort of work indirectly on the actual state level regulatory changes because it's really through the business networks that will have their voice, et cetera. So there are other NGOs that are very active on the local level. But of course, we're very keen to get us back to where we were because clearly, as I was saying, that we're not going in the right direction, and so we're going against science, which is obviously really detrimental to all of us for our futures. So it's really, really important that it does happen. At the state level, though, when we're working with states, we're encouraging states to set policies that do support it, but it's not at the micro level. That would be like an offline conversation. But states are definitely stepping in to make sure that they're creating the enabling environment to make sure that a Facebook can be successful or an Anheuser-Busch can be successful in delivering the renewable electricity that they need.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I'm mostly focused on commercial energy matters. That said, as we work with utilities around the country in regulated service territories, so for those of you from outside of the U.S., some states in the U.S. have a regulatory construct where the utilities have to work with a regulator. It's a regulated monopoly. Other states, it's deregulated and sort of anybody can supply customers. But in the regulatory construct, obviously we work closely with utilities and regulators to get new rates done. So that's an important part of our business. And I think we found that regulators in general are very interested to hear a customer perspective on this.
And very similar, we're about 60% regulated, 40% deregulated in the U.S. So heavy conversations with those regulated monopolies. But moreover, regardless of policy, we've set these bold, ambitious goals, and so we're going to work towards those regardless. Yeah, business cases there. So.
From the Enel perspective, I guess I could let Mark and Elaine answer the question from an EGP North America point of view. But what I could say is that in the U.S. particularly, it's interesting. So we're in 24 states in the U.S. And we have a very, generally speaking, we have a very supportive regulatory environment. Clearly there are challenges that we need to overcome in certain places. There are lobbies which are, I guess, representing their own interests, which might not necessarily be aligned with ours. But broadly speaking, we have a pretty supportive regulatory environment. And I guess one surprising thing, the perception, particularly outside the US, is that with the current administration, perhaps there's not as much support for renewables as there was previously. At state level, we have not found, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have not found any kind of walk back on previous commitments. On the contrary, I guess we've got even more support, right?
Yeah, many of the utilities that we've dealt with in the past, they come back for more and more renewables. As Angie mentioned, it just makes good business sense. So in areas where they have customers that are interested in renewables, they are progressing, they are coming back for more. So we see more and more companies and utilities engaging in this.
And I guess that's a really encouraging fact point for the United States that this country continues to want to push forward on this.
And just to add one other thing, I mean, the utilities are going to be the winners in the end, especially with the transformation to electric vehicles.
Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. So Amy and then all of you have mentioned very strong arguments for companies going green. But I would like to raise the fact that adding to those, renewables are already very competitive in almost every country in the world. So it makes business sense go renewable. Even though in spite of that, it's not happening at the scale and the speed that it should be in many emerging economies. What do you think are the barriers that are companies facing to go towards renewable if they are competitive, make business sense, they are meaningful for shareholders? What is stopping companies from buying more renewable? Is it an investment gap? Is knowledge gap? Is bad regulatory frameworks? What is it in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think every market is very different. That's the thing. I mean, from the RE100 companies, I mean, they're definitely approaching it from the 80-20 rule and going for the easiest new renewables that they can put on grid. And obviously, once you get out there globally, it is a little bit more challenging because there could be regulatory constraints, and it's just a different way of doing business, and it makes it harder because folks are used to doing things one way. And so it's just adding work to people, and I always found that when you add work to somebody, it makes it more challenging to get it done because there's extra effort involved. And so that's part of the whole hurdle. So, I mean, Facebook might have some, or Anheuser might have some other specific situations globally.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add on to that, the electricity industry is an old, entrenched industry. In many cases, it's very highly regulated. And so it doesn't lend itself, even in the US where we've gotten a lot of stuff done, it doesn't lend itself particularly well to disruption or to new ways of doing things. And so I think as companies come in and say, hey, this is a new thing that we want, it's taken the industry some time to catch up and sort of figure out how you can provide the products and services to companies that they want. And we are starting to see that. So Facebook has been involved in, I think, 5 or 6 green tariffs now, these utility rates that allow companies to directly source renewables. 6 or 7 years ago when I started doing this, before I was at Facebook, I worked on the first 2, and I think there's 28 now around the country. So we're seeing a shift, but it's taking some time. Some of the structures work and some of them don't. And yes, renewables are cost effective in many markets, but if you can't serve them cost effectively to whatever it is you're trying to do, it sort of doesn't matter. And so figuring out how to put those constructs in place, first in the US where theoretically a lot of this is easier and is still challenging, and then in markets which really don't have any conception of a direct procurement strategy can be very challenging. So I think ultimately what we're seeing is that many of the challenges arise just as these markets are evolving over time to meet the more specific needs of customers who have historically been pretty happy just to make sure the lights turn on.
Yeah. I guess there's one point I would make from the point of view of the utility industry. Don't forget, we're a very long-term industry. So we invest, we build an asset, and we depreciate that asset over a useful life of 30 to 35 years. In the case of a nuclear power plant, can be up to 60 years. So the depreciation profile on these assets is very, very long. And it could well be that when that asset was built, renewables were really very much on the outside. Remember the term unconventional renewable, that was when renewables was this new thing which maybe was going to work and maybe wasn't, and so we weren't really sure. Now, renewables are very much at the center of the energy mix, but we know that now. So it's for that reason that it's so crucial that we make a commitment not to build new conventional, new thermal generation capacity like coal or gas. Because if you think about the amortization profile on that investment, you're going to get to 2049 and you're going to have to make a decision. You're going to have to do one of two things. Either you continue generating electricity from that thermal source, and so you're probably going to be fine, which is going to destroy shareholder value, or you're going to have to take a write-down because you're going to have a piece of unamortized asset which you need to hit your investors with. So either way, you're going to be damaging your investors. So it's bad business sense from a financial point of view. And I guess this is one of the issues that we have, is that we've still got unamortized assets which need to be sort of worked through the system. Can we have a question from this side of the room? We haven't. We'll come back to you. Sorry.
I have a question for Angie and Peter about 2 changes that are occurring in real time in June of 2018. And the first is really brought forward by Greenpeace, Green IT Initiative, and some top global companies like Google and IBM who've been forthright about their concern about the reputational risk inherent in unbundled RECs and their explicit commitment to, on a go-forward basis, only use bundled RECs. And then second, you've mentioned, Angie, that in your 200,000 person company, the 7.5 megawatts you've been able to do on site, which really brings home how much has to be done through large-scale renewable energy, utility-scale renewable energy, which I think really, addresses the question of why aren't all companies doing this if the business case is so clear, because it's particularly clear at the utility level which only a very small number of companies can sole source as the sole off-taker of a large renewable energy plant. So the second development is the move to aggregated procurement that allows the 99% of the other companies to participate in the cost advantage of utility scale renewables. So I was hoping you could comment on those two developments.
The first that you mentioned, the green piece, I'm not familiar with the exact issue, but I would say that from a rec perspective, everything that we're doing and we're speaking about externally are bundled, right? So we carry the attribute. We don't decouple and then monetize or trade on the side. So for us, it's the coupled story. It's carrying the renewable attribute, and again, additionality is key for our goal. On the second point, the 7.5 megawatts, that's in the United States today. What I would say is that it's difficult to continue to get the right amount of attention and focus each year to build this into your capital plan. So using a off-site asset like we did with Enel, again, made sense from our perspective to quickly take a large portion of what we needed to meet the goal, and we're still only at 50%. So a lot of additional work to do.
Mark, do you have a perspective on this? I mean, how do we move this market offering down to be more accessible to medium-sized enterprises and indeed small businesses? Not everybody brews 20 billion bottles of beer a year. Right? How do we do this? I mean, this is a big challenge for us.
We are working with our current business development team, and we are looking for large, what we call anchor tenants for many of our projects, but then we are preserving a portion of our projects for these small, middle-sized consumers so that we can bundle them together and do several small offtake arrangements with them. So we are beginning to do that now. We are in the process of running a process for several of these different companies or smaller sized companies.
Great.
So.
And I'll add back to that too, that we are in the process of looking at our supply chain and what we can do with our suppliers, particularly our large packaging suppliers and our large raw material suppliers, to understand, is there opportunity to work collectively and aggregate to a large scale agreement?
So,
just very briefly on the same topic. First of all, on the bundled conversation, I think most of the folks that are public about this, and the names that you mentioned, including Facebook, are focused on bundled transactions. We're really proud of the work we've done. We're proud that those bundled transactions are in the same grid region as the facilities. Obviously, for us, I mean, you could cover the roof of a data center in solar and put turbines around the outside, and it would be nothing. So we need large scale projects to meet the energy consumption of those facilities. So, I think there is a move in that direction. Before my time at Facebook, when I was working with companies all over the country on this, I think that there's still a place for some other types of less complicated transactions for companies that want to do things and can't get to a point that a Facebook or a Google or an AB is at. And so there's got to be a spectrum. And this really goes to the second point about aggregation, which is that if you want small and medium companies to be involved in this, to do this, we need simplified products for them to purchase. So aggregation is definitely a step in the right direction because it reduces the size commitments that people have to make and it allows smaller companies to get involved. They're still pretty complicated. And so I think if we want, the mom and pop Main Street businesses, we'll need to see a continued evolution in the industry to simpler products that people can sign up with. And there are things happening. Community solar is a really interesting concept, which basically allows people to buy very small shares of shared solar facilities and sort of take advantage of that through their utility providers. And there's been some great programs in the US on that.
We've got a whole bunch of questions online. I will come back to you, I promise you, as soon as we've... Sorry. But we've got a whole load of questions coming from our live streaming. Can we just... let's see if we can have a look. Here we go. Here's one from Huera Supernova. Wow. In countries where sustainability is not a priority due to low economic development, what actions do you think these countries should start taking to go little by little towards a more modern generation technology mix? Amy, I'm looking at you. What do you
Yeah.
It's quite a big question, wow.
You know, it's always a disappointment to say that sustainability is not a priority in any country when it needs to be a priority in absolutely every country, and I tried to make that case from just where we are with the science. You know, so, I mean, there are folks, I mean, reach out is what I would say, is who's ever in a specific country to reach out. I mean, this is all about a collaboration, and there are plenty of folks working on this, and they're probably, you know, it could be a country where there's a significant supply chain connected to one of the RE100 companies. And again, you know, Angie mentioned that they're looking into supply chain. It's not a part of the commitment for RE100, but a lot of RE100 companies are quickly looking at their supply chain and how do they deal with that. So that could be one option for a country.
I would just add, I mean, our global commitment for renewables is 6 terawatt hours annually of renewable electricity. So we have a great deal of opportunity in countries that don't have the infrastructure to help build the infrastructure and help really move the entire country forward. We also signed a deal in 2016 in Mexico for a large offsite wind project, and it moved the entire country's wind percentage by 4%. So it was massive, right? And so we do think that through our public goals, we will indeed shape and build infrastructure for these countries.
Let's take one more from live stream, if we can, please. So, Emanuela, talking about renewable energy and the Paris Agreement, how can countries help companies to do more? So that's kind of the question on regulation, right? Anything we want to add on this one? What can states, governments do to help companies do more on this?
Well, certainly opening up their markets to make sure that they're able to have renewable electricity available to a company. I mean, we talked about like Southeast Asia is particularly challenging for some folks, just because they don't have the renewables in their mix, and we need to get more. And so some of the RE100 companies are talking about, you know, coming together as a group of companies and entering a country together so that they can, you know, divide up the load and have it be a significant new facility that they would put in place, whether it's wind or solar, within that country.
All right, let's go to, thanks very much, Amy. Yeah, let's have the question. Sorry, you've been extremely patient.
I'm not going anywhere. It's okay. But the ice is. So I was talking last night with Alex, and he's been telling how fast the ice in the Antarctic is melting. So it's 3 times faster than we anticipated. Are we winning or losing this battle with renewables? Although they're becoming more and more cost efficient, are we really winning or losing? That's my first question. And where do you think the conversation stops with the governments? Because sustainability sounds more like a luxury topic. It's not an immediate topic. It's not an emergency. It's always at the end of the list. How do you push it up? But on the real, not just we get together, we talk about it, we all understand it's important, and then we go out and have some water with a lot of ice, drive on a bus that pumps out fumes. I've been seeing that downtown Boston yesterday and stuff like that. How do you actually force that change? How do you make it happen tomorrow? Because the ice is melting and all kind of species are going north. Alex, can you tell us more on that? I found it fascinating how sharks are going up the ocean.
Well, species are moving across.
Microphone. Yeah,
sorry. Species are moving across all sorts of ecosystems. They're changing their ecosystems. By changing their ecosystems, they're changing our ecosystem. That not just in terms of their present, but with them come pathogens, diseases that we've never seen before. I don't know if you all are familiar with the example of the saga antelope, but about 2 or 3 years ago, the saga antelopes, or Central Asian antelope, they look like something out of Star Wars. You know, really an animal invented by George Lucas, if there ever was one. And this population got absolutely wiped by a bug that they were not equipped by a pathogen, a disease that they were not equipped to handle. It turns out they moved because their resources, water and food, had dried out because of climate change. So they encountered a pathogen they couldn't handle. They died by the 80% rate, almost extinct. They're not the first casualties of climate change, for sure. There are many human casualties of climate change, about 4,000 in our own territory of Puerto Rico, that we continue to forget, as Amy has pointed out. So this is happening. And it is our health that's at risk. And I think...
But are we winning on the long run or losing?
Well, I mean, I think we are on the border. I think what we realize, there's been a tremendous amount. Well, we have to fight it no matter what, right? So no matter what, you have to mitigate. And I think that's a key thing. It's not like, okay, we're losing, so let's stop. You have to continue to fight this. I think there's a tremendous amount that has happened over a decade, especially from the business community. We also have the Paris Agreement. There's only one country that's not in that. Yes, that country happens to be the second largest emitter in the world, but businesses and state and local governments, city governments are stepping up. There are many cities that are already putting into their fleets to switch their municipal bus fleets to 100% electric throughout the U.S. I mean, it's a pretty amazing statistic if you look at that mapping. Red states with, blue cities that are going 100% electric. So we have the structure in place. No, I mean, renewables won't get us there, but it's a piece of the puzzle that we have to do. We have to do it. We have to get to zero emissions energy source, but we're probably also going to need to come and figure out to take carbon out of the atmosphere.
So that's next.
It's not even next. We have to do it in parallel.
Yeah, do it now.
But that can be through agricultural changes too.
So as somebody who gives a lot of talks about climate change and health, and one of the questions that I'm sure you get too all the time is one like Georgia just asked, which is how do we change the culture? As Amy pointed out, the change in culture, the scale of the change is such that we probably have never faced before. It is, I didn't like the comparison, but the only thing that really gets close to it is a World War II kind of scale change in the culture where everybody changes jobs and we're all working for one purpose. Perhaps we're not all going to work in renewable energy, but we're all going to do something about it. And I'm heartened by the fact that there is a coordination of businesses through your nonprofit and other nonprofits to do this to some extent. I wonder, is there a coordination of message as well? I've seen lots of logos, 100% love that, other logos from other companies, but we really have to change the culture. We have to make it cool to be 100% renewable. We have to make it cool not to use plastic. We have to make it cool to not burn coal. When we see coal, we have to see death. I mean, that's the equivalent that we have to create in people's minds. To achieve that cultural change, it really requires business and government to collaborate, but especially business to collaborate and change the culture in a way that I think will benefit the bottom line in the end. So is there such an effort to coordinate that message?
I mean, one thing we have talked about is figuring out a way, how do we get the communication out there more? But I would sort of counter that polling does show people care and people understand. So it's sort of a smaller percentage that we need to change in terms of that culture. And that's where the business voice and they're making the economic case for why we have to address climate change, because that's really it. There is no long-term prosperity, no long-term economic prosperity if we don't address climate change. So it's such a false narrative that is out there, unfortunately, and that's where all of us need to use our voices. And I think these businesses are using their voices with their pocketbooks too, and certainly when it comes to voting, people have to make this an issue that they vote on, especially in the next presidential election.
I must say that it's an interesting idea. So speaking as a director of communications of a business that is directly interested in this, it would be enormously helpful to me if there was a forum where actually just from a communications point of view, we were brought together to say, right guys, what's our message? How should we communicate this thing? And let's do it. So
Let's do it.
I might suggest
I'll
that
do
you and
it.
I actually do it together. And
Done.
maybe Climate Week, September, and let's pull it around. Let's get,
I'm
let's
in.
get AB,
We're
let's
in.
get Facebook, let's get all of them together and we'll all, and figure out what is our messaging strategy. And I think because I do agree, the communication of this is crucial to make sure not only that people understand that sustainability is in fact an emergency today, now, but also what do we all need to be doing about it and how can we all work together in concert. I think it's a great point. Thank you very much. Well.
Yes, Andrea Bertaglio. I had a question very similar, so you already answered, and I have a spare question, but it's connected about communication. So because the first thing Amy said is to change the approach in the discussion about climate change. It was too catastrophistic so far. But my question is, I was very impressed about what you said, Ryan, that from outside the US you have the perception that this administration is very much against the fight against climate change. But I heard the opposite, that it was not a problem for you as a business, and it's probably the opposite of Europe or places like Germany, I guess. So I was very impressed about that. But I want to ask you, you spoke about the necessity to convert the transports with electromobility, and many companies want to do that. Enel in Italy is very active in facilitating the development of infrastructure. So the question for Ryan is, are you doing the same in the US, as you have such a big green business here as well? And for Amy, how this Trump administration is somehow helping the transition, if they do, towards electromobility. And this connected to the previous question, because I see from outside the US the case of Tesla, Elon Musk versus the media. So the point is, Tesla made big steps towards the development of electromobility. So Tesla is an example, not only Tesla. It made electromobility cool for the first time. So can we make that on a larger scale with other companies, despite the fact that now Trump or the politicians look to go against all this? So it's a conflict. So we want to make this, all these topics cool, to promote them also through communication, but apparently everything else is against. So how can we manage them?
I'll answer your first question first, which is about what
15
doing in the United States. But it's a very quick. So there is a crucial piece of the value chain which we do not have in the United States, but which we have in Latin America and in Europe, which is distribution. So we're at the front end of the value chain with generation, with Enel Green Power, and we're at the delivery end of the value chain through NLX. And where we do have, and we bought a business in California called eMotorworks, which develops electric mobility charging solutions, probably one of the most advanced in the world. So in the US, we definitely are present in the electric mobility space, but really what we're doing to really deliver impact in countries like Italy, but in all of the countries where we have a distribution network, is that we use our expertise in managing the infrastructure to build that infrastructure that is required in order to ensure that you have smart charging and fast charging very widely diffused. Sorry, that's a bad Italian translation into English, I don't know. But spread out around the country. So because we do not have a distribution presence in the United States, actually where we need to make that push is on the distribution businesses in the US, which is a fairly disparate group of utilities in the US. You agree?
Agreed.
Great.
So I was just going to clarify on what's happening. So the U.S. administration is not helping here. They're actually promoting fossil fuels. So that's what's happening today. And they're also trying to lower fuel efficiency standards for all the automotive. So some hard-won regulations they're trying to roll back. So that's the state of play. But where we're able to make effort and make advancement is at the business level and throughout the state governments. So there is action happening, but the administration is not working on our side at the moment.
So I can add just with a couple things that we're doing from a business perspective. We announced in the fall of last year with Tesla a pre-order of 20 of their heavy haul EV vehicles for over the road. So we're very excited about that. And then in addition to that, this year we also announced a partnership with Nikola for hydrogen technology for up to 800 vehicles over the road. So it would be 100% of our dedicated fleet. And about 10% of our supply chain emissions, a little less than 10%, come from our transportation space. So for us, that's a big win, and we see both technologies fitting or being complementary. And then we also have EV and battery technology that we're looking at for our short haul, our box trucks, our deliveries at retail. We call it tier 2, but our secondary trucks that would deliver or be more in an urban setting. So a lot happening in that space, yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
In the world today, we have millions of people without access to energy. And it's growing. The energy they're accessing, if it's reaching, it's not renewable. Like, how can we close the gap in terms of access to giving access to energy to everyone, and that access is renewable and clean energy?
So Facebook actually has an energy access program. It's closely related to our connectivity programs, which are dedicated to bringing internet connectivity to the billions of people in the world that don't currently have it. But obviously, internet connectivity doesn't really help you if you can't charge the devices on which you're going to be looking at it. So we have an energy access program which is really focused on trying to enable system-level changes, which not only promote energy access in emerging markets, but also make sure that that's renewable energy access. So looking at financing models, transformational technology changes, particularly things like interoperability standards. So there's a lot of different people working on sort of off-grid or remote energy systems, and making sure that those all work together and sort of play together nicely is something that's really important. And then also working on closing research gaps. So making sure that key policymakers, decision makers in emerging markets have the appropriate information in order to make decisions about how to get more people connected. So that's an important initiative for our company.
It's a great question, because I was at the World Economic Forum in Kigali, the World Economic Forum on Africa. It was hosted in Kigali in Rwanda, and I remember when I flew back to Rome, we took off, and you look out of the window, and it's just pitch black. You do not see anything, not a light anywhere. And we'd spent the last 2 days at the World Economic Forum talking about the fourth industrial revolution and how we were going to bring it to Africa. But it struck me in that moment that the first industrial revolution hasn't even hit, a large parts of Africa. 700 million people in Africa without access to electricity. So it's absolutely the right question, and EGP is working hard. We've landed in Zambia, in Ethiopia, Kenya, very big presence in South Africa, which is already a fairly industrialized economy. But this is something that everybody's working on. And another interesting thing, all the people from the power utilities, we all seem to kind of run around and we were bumping into each other. And somebody said to me, isn't it embarrassing that all your competitors are always with you at all of these things? And I said, actually, it really doesn't bother me at all. There is more than enough playing space for all of us. In fact, far too much. So we need everybody, because there's no way that one player by themselves is going to be able to do that.
And we have, there's a lot of activity happening in Africa on energy access, and we're also working on it in India. We have a specific program for energy access in India where the size of the U.S. population doesn't have reliable electricity, and instead of having coal come in to fill that need, looking at solar and wind and bringing distributed generation.
That's another cool thing, by the way, actually, is that we're going to go with these communities that don't currently have electricity. They're going to leapfrog the entire development process that the rest of the world has gone through, and they're going to go straight to the most modern technology that there is. A great example: we delivered a microgrid to a little community high up in the Andes Mountains on the border between Chile and Bolivia. So these guys were totally off the Chilean grid. And we went up there and we built them this state-of-the-art, totally modern microgrid with hybrid generation capacity and storage as well. So they're still off-grid, but they now have the most modern technology that there is. So they've kind of leapfrogged the whole development process. Yes, sir.
This morning we are talking about climate change in very rational economic terms, no? But don't you think that one of the main questions about that is hindering and poisoning this cultural change that we are hoping is all around the scientific topic. It's all around the ignorance, no, and the lack of interest about some crucial questions we don't accept. Apart from economic communication and so on, it's a sort of a scientific issue.
I mean, I think it's obviously a challenge in this country that there are folks that don't seem to, follow science, meaning don't want to take science into consideration when making decisions. I mean, I don't think anybody in business would ever not look at science or facts when they're making a long-term business decision. So it's just a challenge that we have here, unfortunately, with a big division of folks that look at science very differently than certainly in academic institutions such as Harvard or many else around the States. I don't have the answer for why that is. It's a little baffling, but it looks like Alex might, yeah.
Alex.
It's not just a lack of interest in science, it's a lack of interest in facts and culture. So my personal challenge at educating or giving talks to lay audiences, which I actually prefer, is to give stealth science, to give covert science, to tell stories. People love stories, they hate facts. So tell a story. Tell a story and put the science in there, and that's the way you communicate the science. And that is really the only effective way to do this, to get through to people, to make an empathetic connection, to make an economic connection, health connection. People care about their health, their pocketbook, and sometimes about other people. So you tell that story. But I have actually a question. I know Enel, I don't know where your accent is actually. On
South
that.
African.
No, the accent on Enel. When I knew you were from South Africa. When I was growing up in Italy, it was Enel, but now we're saying Enel. Okay, whatever. But I know you all have pioneered some carbon recapture technology. One is in Brindisi.
Carbon capture?
Yes.
I don't know. I'm looking to somebody to help me. I don't think we have carbon capture technology.
There's one. I'm fairly familiar with it because I grew up by it. There's one power plant in Brindisi, Italy, or in the area, that is carbon neutral. It recaptures CO2. In any case, the question is, how far are we from the carbon recapture that Amy just mentioned, from that technology being actually operational? That's it.
I don't know the answer to the question about Brindisi, to be honest. I don't think that it is a carbon neutral power plant, but I'll check it and I'll get back to you. One of the reasons why I'm slightly skeptical about it is because I've heard our chief executive speaking about his own personal doubts around how we can make carbon capture work. It is a very difficult technology to make it work. So far as I'm aware, nobody is making it work very effectively.
Besides nature,
it's not something.
Besides photosynthesis, nobody else can make it.
That's not carbon capture. That's that's changing it into something useful, isn't it? Photosynthesis.
But when you put it in the ground, when that forest turns into, I don't know, dirt, you put it into the ground. So you bury back CO2 that you excavate with coal and stuff like that, and oil. Do you have any other technology that is actually working?
I mean, just going back, CCS technology, we'd worked on that maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and we couldn't really get a strong buy-in from enough folks. I think there were significant liability issues. Who was going to take the liability for sequestering the carbon in the ground? So then we've abandoned that. So I haven't been following it as closely, but it doesn't seem like there have been that many large-scale plants, although I think the Norwegians feel that they do a pretty adequate job of it. But there are other folks, but not enough, I think, working on other carbon capture, air capture technologies, and there's money going into that space and investment into that space.
Just to tie this conversation back to the earlier conversation about a change in narrative, I don't know if the speakers are familiar with Paul Hawkins' Project Drawdown, but that is a deliberate attempt to invert the narrative from one of avoiding harm to creating success. And success is not avoiding, a 2%, a 2-degree rise in global average surface mean temperatures. It's actually drawing down carbon from the atmosphere using agricultural practices, using sea farming techniques, using scaled wind, scaled solar, storage, and calculating it all in a coordinated way to actually get to the point of drawdown. And I think that notion of offering, I think it will bring more actors into the effort, actors in particular, and I think of entrepreneurs who require a positive vision to be fully engaged. And so, it's something the group that might take into account, because there's been decades of thinking going into how to have a more positive narrative and to recognize that the history of the 21st century, when it's written, will be a heroic history, or it won't be written.
I agree.
Thank you. So just a brief comment on the science policy interface. I think we really urgently need some translators from the science that could translate the science language to the business and the policy language, because it's very tough to understand each other and to make meaningful communication for policymakers. So the science is there, but nobody's getting the key messages. And then building on the access to energy and the need of better communicating sustainability and changing the conversation from one side to the other, I would say we need to change also the conversation from just the climate agenda to a development agenda, because this is not longer about climate change only. It's about developing, being able to develop in any way in the world. So, and this could cope with this talking about how development needs from climate to be tackled. That's already very well understood that no one of the, or many of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are going to be met if we don't tackle climate change. And the same way, if we by tackling climate change, we can deliver many of the SDGs like energy access and urban sustainable cities and infrastructure. So it's not like a double agenda. It's the same, and this could help to cope with these kind of messages we get that in our country, this sustainability is not a priority because we have development priorities. So it's the same. Right. It's the same. We are talking about the same thing, but maybe it's communicating as different. You have to choose sustainability or development, and that's a...
Well, there's a very neat term, which is sustainable development. So we should push on that.
Okay. Can I add to that?
Yeah,
I think sustainability is really a catalyst for development, right? When you think about it, and one of the things we also launched with our 2025 goals is an accelerator program. I was speaking at breakfast this morning to a few people about this, but we tagged it Accelerator 100 Plus. So the idea is to come up with 100 new entrepreneurs, startup businesses, solutions, tech development by 2025, and take them through a process, an annual process. So I think that there's an absolute tie there, and that it just raises the bar. Yeah. So.
Brazil is one of the top countries in the world that produces renewable energy in the energy matrix, mainly considered the hydro energy. Nowadays, we are diversifying. The renewable sources include in our energy matrix wind and solar energy. In the context of the recovering economic crisis and also global warming, how the companies can enjoy this kind of movement to go green? Can be a model like big companies to follow?
That's a great question. Who wants to answer that? Who's got a big presence in Brazil? You?
We do. Yeah, so you want to go?
We're not in Brazil. We're not in Brazil. So
I don't have a lot of...
I think it's Brazil is, from an economic point of view, certainly what we see is huge opportunity for growth. We've seen, it was very interesting, a couple of years ago, our CEO was interviewed on CNBC in New York, and he cited this statistic. He said, of the last 3 public auctions for energy, any technology, cheapest price wins, 75% of it went to wind.
Wind, yeah.
Could have been coal. Cheapest price wins, that was the rule. And 75% of the capacity went to wind. So Brazil is this country which is enormously wealthy in terms of natural resources. As you mentioned, hydro is a really big part, but we're seeing more and more solar wind coming through as well. I just, it's a big economy. It's a growing economy. It has challenges, I guess, and we're all very painfully aware of what a lot of them are. But I certainly from the Enel point of view, and you can see it because we've just been recently competing to buy a business in Brazil, and there was a huge amount of competition for this asset. A lot of external international investors are looking at Brazil too. So I think there's a lot of potential for Brazilian businesses and foreign businesses coming into Brazil to tap into this huge wealth of natural resource that Brazil has. Any final comment? Yes, ma'am.
Well, you're talking about clean energy and large scale, but talking also about communication and engagement, and taking your own offices or headquarters as a small country with a space and corporate culture as well. I would like to know, how are you applying these concepts in your own buildings, and how are you communicating these efforts to your employees as citizens?
Great question.
This actually came up at dinner last night, and I think it's something that's really important to both AB and Facebook. Our offices are extremely sustainable, some of the most sustainable in the world. And so, it's something that we're really proud of. It also just makes it a great environment for employees to work in. We have a variety of programs both at the headquarters and then in satellite offices around the U.S. and also overseas. Many of our larger offices actually have their own what we call Green At program. So it's sort of a local group of folks that are sustainability minded. They can create their own sustainability initiatives and work with the sustainability team at headquarters on those types of things. So I think it's something that's really important to employees, especially with our California headquarters, something that a lot of folks in California are really concerned about, and obviously employee engagement is really important on that.
I love the way she asked the question. Your headquarters is like a small country. Yours actually is.
That's pretty big. Yeah.
Angie?
I would just add to that, it's very important, especially when we look at our real estate strategy and where we're leasing buildings. But it comes back to, again, employee engagement, motivation. Are you happy where you work, right? Or do you like coming to work? Is the atmosphere what you would expect of the company? And the answer is yes.
And recruitment as well.
Recruitment, right. Yeah, top talent, they want to ensure that they're coming to a sustainable workplace, right? So.
But buildings are definitely a key sector that there's a lot of work still to be done. We just launched something recently with the World Green Building Councils for net zero buildings. There is a lot of work that needs to happen for all of us, both retrofits as well as new builds. New builds are not being built necessarily to net zero.
We do participate with LEED as well and have some LEED established buildings in the United States. So that's a program that just you have to adhere to certain standards when you build.
Last question.
Okay, thanks.
Second one, you want to have one.
Second. Okay, last one. Amy, you were talking about that's not only focused about the energy sector, but also the transport sector. Mm-hmm. Do you see, or it's an open question to everyone, how our companies that are producing energy are going to be more involved in mobility also? in how can we engage in mobility in cities towards transforming from a fossil consumption of mobility to electric mobility? Like, how can companies be involved in that transition too?
Well, that's what we're hoping with our new sort of sister campaign on EV100, is to get companies to send the demand signal to the market that their fleets are going to be basically electric or zero emissions as long as it's powered by renewables, as well as installing charging infrastructure to make, sort of get rid of some of the range anxiety. We figured out that most people, when they're going to charge their vehicles, are going to charge it at home or they're going to charge it at work. So installing charging infrastructure for their employees will be critical, but also for customers too. So that's just launched, and we're very hopeful that it will be sort of shifting the market in the same way that RE100 did for EVs.
Good.
No, just a last thing. I'm resuming a bit because after speaking of so many topics, cultural change, possibilities, opportunities in Africa and so on, a prediction probably, a question to everybody. I'm just curious. Who's going to lead now, going back to the green economy, corporate green economy? Who's going to lead the green economy? China, US, Europe, in your opinion, as you see from inside these developments? For all of you.
Big prediction, wow.
I mean, Facebook is a global company, so I think, the Facebook position is we would like to see all companies and countries leading this. There's a lot of great work coming from all over the world, and I think this is a global problem that really needs a global solution. So
business is competition.
Yeah, I mean, my personal hope really is that everybody is stepping up and that we're seeing. I mean, that's probably not the answer you were looking for, but nonetheless, I really mean it.
No, that's my hope as well. But
yeah, I mean, I think we need a global solution to this.
I think it has to be, right? I think, as Amy said, we can't. This is not like you do one and then you do the next. Everything needs to move in parallel because, as we saw on her timeline, we're kind of right up against it. And it is a bit of a question, are we winning or losing this battle? If we wait too long, if anybody waits too long, we're going to tip very quickly into losing it, I think. So the answer has to be the non-answer, unfortunately, which is I think we've all got to do it together. But anyway,
thank you very much.
We're done with our time. So I just want to take 1 minute to just pull together, I think what we've talked about here is a bit of a recipe, really. And the ingredients that go into this recipe are support from governments, willingness to invest, and willingness to push the boundaries on the part of business, support and coordination from the world of the NGOs in bringing everybody together and making sure that all the pieces are fitting together. And then a really key ingredient seems to have come through. I'm not sure if this is just because I'm a communications guy, but communication seems to be a bit of a buzzword around this. We actually need to get a really coherent, consistent story developed and deployed to overlay on top of those three pieces of the puzzle. So I just want to thank everybody for your participation, for your engagement, for your questions. Thanks to everybody who's been following us on the live streaming. It's been great, again, being together for an Enel Focus On, the 10th in the series in Boston. I'd like to thank my global communications team who've been with us for the last couple of days and for following us. And I'd particularly like to thank Isabella Panizza, who's our head of global digital communications, and her team who've organized this event. So thanks very much, guys. Well done. I'll let Isabella tell you about the next stop on the Enel Focus On tour.
Yeah, before that, I want to thank also the North America team that was crucial for the organization, of course, because, they are hosting us. And, definitely, there's going to be another appointment in the autumn. We are going to be in Bucharest, Romania. So, George, finally, you don't have to travel. And then we are going to be in Buenos Aires in Argentina and many other places. This format is traveling around. We started in Rome, September 16. It's very successful, so please stay tuned and follow us.
So,
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Empowered by the winds of change, we set our sails and delve into the earth to tame her elements knowing that the only way to control them is to set them free. Now it is our time to step into the future, in a world of boundless energy, a world where nothing is created, nothing is lost, everything is renewed.